The protagonist stood amid the ruins of a shattered city, leaning on a radiant blue sword. He had never imagined death could come so suddenly. His blade trembled, stained with blood. He fixed his blue eyes on what lay ahead. His name is Benyu, a fourth-class soldier. He was assigned to a mission immediately after joining the squad. Bloody remains lay beside his leg. Standing before a battlefield where the corpses of humans and monsters were scattered together, Benyu realized the main force had betrayed them. They had been sacrificed to lure the level 5 mutants into a trap. Someone sprinted through the ruins at full speed. The protagonist muttered that they had become nothing more than expendable cannon fodder, people no one cared about, but perhaps that was for the best. Towering behind him was a gigantic monster enveloped in crimson energy. Benyu raised his sword in one swift motion. He shouted that he had endured enough of this apocalypse. The air spiraled around him, whipping dust from the ground as the protagonist's eyes widened. Blood sprayed through the air as Benyu opened his mouth wide, his body surrounded by crimson energy. The monster drove its hand straight through his body, forcing him to drop his sword. A breeze rustled the leaves of the trees surrounding the ordinary city. Suddenly, the protagonist jolted awake with a scream. His eyes flew open as he stared at his hands in disbelief, unable to understand why he was still alive. He turned toward the clock on the table and saw the date, May 5th, 2017. He wondered if that date wasn't from a year ago, and whether he had somehow traveled back in time. A notification appeared on his phone. Fong had sent him a message asking him to work overtime that weekend because the project was urgent and represented the company's biggest strategic initiative of the year. The message promised that strong performance would be recognized during the year-end evaluation, while any delay in progress would be difficult to explain to the boss. An hour later, after a missed call, Fong sent another message asking if he was there and urging him to reply. Venu thought about the overtime request. Then he remembered that the company had ended up shutting down before the end of the year. He tossed his phone onto the bed. The protagonist exclaimed that he had returned to the past, covering his face with one hand. He steadied himself and realized that while death marked the end of everything, it had somehow given him another chance to live. A look of determination filled his eyes. This time he would live again, but he would never be cannon fodder. Clenching his fist, Venu swore that no one would ever exploit him again. From now on, he alone would control his own fate. His gaze shifted to the backpack and knife resting on the table. If his memory was correct, today was the very first day of the apocalypse, the beginning of the zombie invasion. Slinging the backpack over his shoulder, he resolved to survive the apocalypse one step at a time. As time passed, the gap between people would only continue to grow wider. Gripping the knife tightly, the protagonist reminded himself that preparation was everything. Otherwise, he would meet the same fate as in his previous life. The moment he heard someone screaming for help, he spun around. A woman behind the door begged her husband, asking what was wrong with him and pleading with him not to bite her. A violent crash followed as someone smashed through the door, sending it bending inward before it was hurled aside. As the dust settled, a blood-soaked woman lay motionless on the floor. Standing before the protagonist was a dark figure. Zombies are creatures whose bodies have been corrupted by demonic energy, causing them to lose their senses while reducing their strength and speed, making them weaker than ordinary humans. Their only weakness is the core of demonic energy within them. Frowning, Venu recognized it as the unmistakable sign that the apocalypse had begun. A confident smile spread across his face as he assumed a fighting stance, grateful that he had prepared in advance. The zombie lunged forward with its mouth stretched wide open. The protagonist realized that without his preparation, dealing with it would have been far more difficult. He knew that every zombie's demonic core was located in a different place, something that often confused people during their first encounter. Looking at the zombie with one eye dangling from its socket, he relied on the battle knowledge and experience from his previous life. Standing directly before it, he knew that if he found the core and struck it precisely, he could kill the zombie in the blink of an eye. He stabbed it with his knife and, in a single fluid movement, ended up behind the monster. The system announced that he had killed a level 0 zombie and earned 1 point. Clenching his fist in triumph, the protagonist declared that, just like in his previous life, killing zombies still rewarded him with points. The end of the world had arrived and civilization collapsed. Money became nothing more than worthless paper, replaced by a new rule: the strong and the weak. Along with it came a point-based trading system centered around exchange pillars. Points cannot be traded between people and can only be earned by killing monsters such as zombies and mutated beasts. Whenever a survivor touches an exchange station, they can spend their points to obtain various items or awaken one of the 3 main classes: warrior, archer, or mage. After changing classes, a person's physical abilities become twice as strong as those of an ordinary human. Those fortunate enough to obtain a rare hidden class gain even more mysterious and overwhelming powers. He stepped into the hallway. Looking at the zombies roaming the corridor, he recalled that, according to his memories from his previous life, the nearest exchange station was located at the entrance to the residential complex. Back then, like everyone else, he had stayed inside his apartment and missed the chance to earn valuable points during the early stages of the apocalypse. The zombies slowly turned toward him. The protagonist decided he would quickly collect 10 points before heading to the exchange station to become a level 1 warrior. Glancing around the hallway packed with zombies, he remarked that there were plenty of them to deal with. The zombies let out furious growls, opened their mouths, and rushed toward him. The protagonist knew he had no choice but to face them head-on. With a single slash, he decapitated a zombie and earned 1 point. Another zombie placed its hand on his shoulder. As he turned around, the creature, once a human, lunged with its mouth wide open. He drove his elbow into it, piercing its chest, and received another point. The impact shattered the bone in his elbow. Cursing under his breath, he realized his physical strength was far too low. He needed to change classes as soon as possible to become stronger. He glanced behind him. A horde of zombies was rapidly closing in, and one of them suddenly leaped forward to attack. The protagonist settled into a fighting stance, gripping the handle of his knife as tightly as he could. A blue trail followed the blade as he unleashed a series of rapid strikes against the zombies surrounding him. He pulled the knife free from a zombie's skull. The zombie collapsed to the floor, and once he found himself surrounded by piles of fallen undead. Breathing heavily, he declared that he had finally gathered all 10 points. He turned to face the far end of the dark hallway. The protagonist stated that it was time to change his class. Something cloaked in dark energy was approaching. From the depths of the shadowy corridor, a creature resembling a beast emerged. The protagonist broke into a nervous sweat. The beast's single eye gleamed with a brilliant light. It was a black dog with heavily developed muscles and exposed bones protruding from its back. He wondered whether it was the neighbor's dog and if it had mutated as well. The monster spotted him with its lone eye. It let out a threatening roar, bearing a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist realized he had no chance of defeating the mutated beast before changing his class. He immediately turned and ran, deciding that escape was his only option since he could not confront it head-on. Clenching his jaw, Gu glanced over his shoulder. The beast opened its jaws wide as dark energy gathered inside its mouth. It lunged at him, but the protagonist threw himself to the side. Gritting his teeth, he realized the situation was getting dangerous. The beast sank its teeth into his leg and hurled him aside. Gu crashed through a glass window, shattering it with his back. Blood sprayed out as he opened his mouth in pain. He fell heavily to the ground. The monster stood directly in front of him, baring its teeth. Reaching for a shard of glass on the floor, the protagonist thought the beast seemed completely focused on him. The creature opened its mouth wide and clenched its jaws. He resolved that he would not die without putting up a fight. The monster leaped forward to attack, but landed behind him instead. The protagonist spun around in shock. He couldn't understand what was happening or why the beast wasn't attacking him. Staring at the monster's face, he wondered if it had abandoned the idea of attacking him. If not, then what was it doing? The creature paced back and forth, as though trying to keep him from getting any closer to the place behind it. His eyes widened when he noticed a portal standing behind the beast. He immediately recognized it as a treasure land, an incredibly rare phenomenon even in his previous life. No one had ever figured out how these places appeared or vanished, and there was never any pattern to when they emerged. One thing, however, was certain. Anyone who managed to enter could obtain treasures far more valuable than anything available from the exchange pillars. The earlier someone entered, the greater the rewards they could claim. The protagonist concluded that the beast had most likely discovered the place first, which was why it refused to let anyone approach, guarding it as if it were its own territory. Unfortunately, only humans could enter a treasure land. No matter how hard the beast tried, it would never be able to get inside. The monster slowly wagged its tail, as if it had realized he was interested in the treasure land. Then the beast opened its jaws and charged. The protagonist shouted that he had nowhere left to run. He swung the shard of glass toward the beast's mouth as its razor-sharp fangs closed in on his hand. The monster clamped its teeth down on his hand. Gritting his teeth, Venom spoke, then collapsed to the ground. He immediately reached for the knife lying nearby. He began hacking wildly at the beast with the knife, screaming for it to die. Again and again he roared for the monster to finally die. Suddenly, the beast's eyes flashed blue. The protagonist's eyes widened in horror. The beast tore off his arm, and he screamed in agony while clutching the severed limb. Crying out, he staggered backward, struggling to stay on his feet. Standing before the beast, Wolf forced himself to stay calm. Closing one eye, he reminded himself that lost body parts could be restored by leveling up, so losing them wasn't the end. His gaze shifted to the portal. No matter the cost, if he wanted to survive, entering the treasure land was his only option. Wrapped in dark energy, the mutated beast lunged at him. Venom gritted his teeth and cursed inwardly. The beast's attack sent a cloud of dust into the air, but the protagonist managed to leap leaped forward just in time, reaching out toward the portal. A surge of excitement filled his mind. The beast rapidly closed in from behind, sinking its fangs into his leg. The protagonist cursed in frustration. Gritting his teeth, he raised his knife and shouted, "If you like it that much, then keep it." With one decisive slash, he severed his own leg, leaving it clenched between the monster's jaws, and dove straight into the portal. The beast toppled onto its back, its legs flailing in the air. The protagonist vanished into the dark portal. Beyond it lay a dimly lit chamber with a floor patterned like a giant microchip. Was shot out of the portal and crashed onto the ground. He remained still for a moment, staring silently at the chest as he wondered whether he had actually made it. A weary smile spread across the protagonist's face as he looked at the chest. He muttered that he had sacrificed an arm and a leg just to reach this place. Stretching out his hand toward it, he hoped that sacrifice would not have been in vain. The chest contained only a single item, a dark scroll glowing with a faint purple light. The scroll rose into the air, and Wu exclaimed in surprise that it was a hidden class scroll. Grinning broadly, he realized the risk had been worth it. Although hidden classes were not always superior to standard ones, their basic abilities were unquestionably stronger than those of regular classes. He reached out and touched the scroll. The protagonist raised his other hand to shield himself from the blinding light. The radiant energy gathered into an elongated shape before transforming into a hand, replacing the one he had lost. The system congratulated him on successfully changing classes and announced his new class, Soulmaster. Looking at his restored hand, Wu realized that changing classes had allowed him to level up, heal all his injuries, and even gain an innate skill or talent in the process. Gazing ahead, he recalled that every first-tier skill belonging to the three main classes was only F rank. When the information panel appeared, he wondered what kind of ability he would receive as a Soulmaster. The panel stated that the player was currently a level 1 Soulmaster with a base attribute value of 2. He had acquired a unique ability called Soul Realm, an unranked unique skill that could neither be forgotten nor replaced. The protagonist stroked his chin thoughtfully. The Soul Realm was a place where his soul summons could reside. Each time the Soulmaster leveled up, a new Soul Realm would be unlocked. His class change had been completed successfully, and he had automatically received a destined soul known as the Soul Beast, which occupied the first Soul Realm. The Soul Beast's current attribute value was 2. Its first ability was Soul Attack, an S-rank passive combat skill. Whenever the Soulmaster attacked, he would also inflict damage directly on the target's soul. The amount of damage depended on the difference in attributes between the opponent and the host. If the opponent's attribute value was 10 times higher than the host's, the ability would have no effect. The beast flew directly into the protagonist's head. Its second ability was Soul Beast Blessing, an unranked skill that allowed the destined Soul Beast to merge with the Soulmaster, transferring its base attributes to him and granting him access to the Soul Beast's own abilities. While in this state, the Soul Beast could not be returned to the Soul Realm, and none of the other creatures within the Soul Realm could be summoned. Every Soul Beast occupying one of the Soul Master's realms would grant him an additional ability based on its individual powers. The protagonist frowned and closed his eyes. He activated battle mode and initiated Soul Beast Fusion. His updated attributes appeared on the information panel. Smiling, he called it incredible. After merging with the beast, his attributes had increased dramatically, surpassing those of every other class. He declared that he could now easily defeat anyone at the same level, and that this was the strongest hidden class he had ever encountered. Walking across the stone floor with one foot bare, Wu declared that the dog waiting outside was no longer a threat to him. As he approached the portal, he wondered just how far this new power would allow him to go in the future. A determined smile spread across his face as he admitted he could hardly wait to find out. The mutated beast prowled around the portal when a rift suddenly opened within it. The protagonist stepped out of the portal wearing a broad smile. The beast immediately tensed for battle, baring its razor-sharp fangs. Wu remarked that thanks to the beast, he had been able to discover such a priceless treasure, then asked how he should repay the favor. The beast stared back at him. The protagonist answered his own question, saying he would send it to hell in the quickest way possible. With a furious growl, the beast lunged at him. Wu didn't dodge. Instead, he shifted to the side and drove a kick into the beast's flank. The creature was thrown backward before crashing onto the ground. Wu's eyes widened in surprise as he exclaimed that he had become incredibly strong. The beast turned to face him once more, and the two confronted each other again. The protagonist thought that simply becoming twice as strong apparently wasn't enough. If raw strength alone couldn't overwhelm it, then it was time to test his new fighting abilities. Violet energy began to surround him. Letting out a fierce roar, the beast charged once again. Wu grinned, cursed at the monster, and slammed a kick directly into its face. He activated his first ability, Soul Strike. The monster opened its jaws wide, shrouded in dark energy, as a swirling vortex of purple energy enveloped it. Moments later, the beast lay motionless in a pool of its own blood. blood. The protagonist remarked that his very first skill was already S-rank. This was the true power of a soulmaster. The monster let out a low growl, refusing to move from the ground. Venu stared at it, sensing that something was wrong. It didn't look dead. Slowly, the monster began struggling back to its feet. A notification appeared. Growth. The beast's fangs rapidly extended, becoming several times longer than before. Awakened skill, vital battle S-rank. As the user's injuries worsen, their perception of pain is drastically reduced. Their basic physical attributes increase exponentially with no upper limit. Arcs of electricity crackled around the monster. The protagonist realized that this beast also possessed an S-rank ability. A level 1 mutated beast and a level 1 soulmaster now stood face to face. Wu thought that although they were both level 1, he was facing an opponent with a genuine S-rank ability. Jumping backward, he admitted that he couldn't defeat it and would have to retreat. The beast roared and immediately gave chase as the protagonist broke into a run. He sprinted toward the entrance of the building, grabbed the metal door with both hands, ripped it clean off its hinges, and slammed it to the ground. Venu leaped out onto the street. The heavy iron door crashed down onto the mutated beast. A furious roar echoed from inside the building, causing the protagonist to stop and turn around with a frown. He muttered that the creature was truly terrifying. The more pain it suffered, the stronger it became, and with an ability like that, defeating it was almost impossible. He couldn't remember ever hearing about such a monster in his previous life. In the end, he decided it didn't matter. He had more important things to do. Bino ran down the street, recalling that on the third day of the apocalypse, a massive portal leading to a treasure land would appear in Hanbin Park. Inside that portal were a rare black book, an F-rank skill called Protector's Armor, and many other valuable treasures. A determined frown crossed his face. Since he had been given a second chance at life, there was no way he could afford to miss this opportunity. However, a treasure land of that scale would be incredibly dangerous, so he needed to acquire a few items from the exchange pillar first. Suddenly, something caught his attention, and his eyes widened. He came to an abrupt stop. Looking down in disbelief, he saw an enormous horde of undead below. He realized the area had already been overrun by zombies in an incredibly short time. Looking ahead, he thought it was no wonder that, in his previous life, so many people who chose to leave their homes had ended up dead. Charging forward, he told himself that if he wanted to reach the exchange station, this was the only route available. That meant he had no choice but to fight his way through the zombies. The zombies turned toward him. He smashed a zombie's body apart with a flurry of punches. Growling, another zombie lunged at him from behind. Before long, an entire horde had surrounded the protagonist. Bino shouted for them to get out of his way, and a powerful shockwave of energy blasted the zombies into the air. The protagonist remained standing as the wind swirled around him. Narrowing his eyes, he declared that no one would stop him in this lifetime. He leaped forward and shouted that anyone who stood in his way would die. A minute later, the ground was blanketed with lifeless bodies. Wu stood before a dark pillar, smiling. He declared that he had finally reached the exchange station. Placing his palm against the pillar, a notification appeared. Welcome. You may now access the exchange system. Please select the items you wish to exchange. The protagonist pressed a button on the interface. A list of items appeared on the screen, and he noted that they were the same ones he remembered. Since the apocalypse had only just begun, he expected the selection to be much broader. He entered a command on the holographic keyboard. Bino remarked that he had suffered a few injuries while fighting the zombie horde, so his first priority was obtaining recovery potions. His gaze settled on the enter key, and several windows displaying different potions appeared before him. The protagonist observed that far more items were now available, but after checking the prices, he realized they were all extremely expensive. After spending 100 points, he said that the only thing he could still afford was a beginner restoration potion. He emptied the potion and said he should drink it. Green energy immediately surrounded his body, and he remarked on how quickly it took effect. The system announced that his body had been restored to 100%. Raising one finger, he decided to see what else he could purchase with his remaining points. The system reported that he had acquired an A-rank non-attribute crystal. The information panel stated, A-rank non-attribute crystal can be used to enhance the body of someone with a level 1 profession. During the enhancement process, the abilities obtained would vary depending on the proportion of crystal used. If a non-attribute crystal were used to enhance the body, the resulting abilities would be worthless. The protagonist crushed the crystal in his hand. Closing his eyes, he reflected that because he possessed the hidden profession of soulmaster, it no longer mattered that he could not use crystals to acquire abilities. Clenching his fists, he said he could feel that his body had become 0.5% stronger. Now he needed to equip himself with a good weapon, which would raise his overall capabilities even further. Several hours later, Yu entered a store and remarked that he no longer had enough points to purchase anything else. Looking over the table of tools, he recalled that in 2 days, a massive portal leading to a treasure land would appear in Jongbin Park, and he needed to prepare thoroughly for it. Picking up an axe and a chainsaw, he decided to take anything that might prove useful. At his current level, soulmaster was a powerful profession, but it was poorly suited for close combat and possessed fewer abilities than ordinary professions. The protagonist frowned, realizing that entering melee combat without summoning a spiritual pet would most likely end in disaster. He therefore needed a weapon that would allow him to defend himself. As he walked down the street, he thought that once his vitality improved in the future, he would also need to strengthen his body, greatly increasing his chances of survival. Suddenly, he heard someone calling for help and turned toward the building where the cries were coming from. Dark silhouettes could be seen inside the shadowy corridor. A man and a young girl stood before the zombies as the creatures rushed toward them. The man wondered where so many zombies had come from, realizing there was no way they could break through the horde. The little girl asked what they were supposed to do now and whether they were really going to die there. Turning to her, the man told her not to give up. He would charge ahead and cover her while she followed close behind. He picked up a steel bar from the ground, but May begged him not to do it, insisting that he would be killed. Standing before the zombies, the man said that if they remained where they were, neither of them would survive. Closing his eyes, he charged forward, swinging the steel bar with all his strength. A zombie struck him, sending him flying to the side. He slammed hard into the wall before collapsing to the floor. "No!" May screamed in despair. Kneeling beside him, she asked if he was all right. The man suddenly shouted, warning her about the danger behind her. An axe flashed through the air, and blood sprayed everywhere. Both May and the man stared in stunned silence. The protagonist told May that turning her back on zombies was far too dangerous. Looking at him in amazement, they exclaimed that he had killed the zombies with a single blow. Who rushed forward with a grin, an axe in hand. Blue energy illuminated the hallway as he carved through the zombies with his axe, remarking on how powerful he had become. They asked who he was. The protagonist turned toward them and asked what they were waiting for, telling them to follow him. The man thanked him for saving their lives. Wu responded with a broad smile. The man told May to stay close beside him. They made their way across a floor soaked with pools of blood. The man and May stared in astonishment as the protagonist severed a zombie's head with a chainsaw before slicing another one clean in half. Then he charged straight into the horde. Glancing back at the man and the girl, he told them the area outside would be safe for a while, so there was no need to rush. The man thanked him once again for saving them. As Bu swung his chainsaw, he told them not to thank him and simply to be more careful from now on. The man asked where he was heading. The protagonist replied that he was looking for better equipment and weapons so he wouldn't be forced onto the defensive against another zombie horde. They told him they knew a place with plenty of weapons. Bu turned around and asked where it was. They answered that it was the police station on Sanga Street. The man explained that the entire police station was surrounded by zombies and that they themselves had only just managed to escape from there. Thanking them for the information, the protagonist said he would go take a look. The next moment, he was already gone. The man asked in disbelief whether he was really going there. May replied that he seemed incredibly strong and believed he could handle it. Who sprinted down the road, frowning as he recalled that the police station they had mentioned should be nearby. Suddenly, he came to an abrupt stop, his eyes widening as an explosion erupted, blasting several bodies through the air. The rats' eyes glowed a sinister red. Giant rats were feasting on people, and the protagonist wondered what was happening there. Peering around the corner, he couldn't understand why there were so many mutated beasts. Frowning, he concluded that something must have happened inside the police station. Climbing onto a pillar, Who decided there was no way to get through from the front, so he would first reach higher ground to see what was happening. He leaped from the pillar onto the rooftop, turned his head, and froze in astonishment. Below, zombies and mutated rats faced each other among rows of abandoned cars. An army of zombies was battling an army of giant rats. The protagonist concluded that there were probably still survivors inside the police station, which had drawn such an enormous number of zombies. Smiling, he realized the zombies and mutated rats were fighting over territory, meaning the police station no longer had their full attention. He jumped down from the roof. The zombies stretched their arms through the steel bars. Someone warned Officer Wan that the zombies were breaking through the gate. A little girl lay on the floor in front of him. One of the officers asked what they were supposed to do, as more and more zombies kept arriving. He said that if they stayed where they were, everyone would surely die. A female officer opened fire with her pistol. Officer Wan told everyone to listen because he had already made his decision. Gritting his teeth, he declared that he would avenge his daughter. The other officers begged him to come to his senses, insisting they could never defeat the mutated rats. The female officer added that countless zombies were still outside. Wu told them not to worry, saying he would avenge his daughter himself and that no one should follow him. The steel gate holding back the zombies finally gave way, and the officers stared with their mouths hanging open. Juan raised his pistol, gritting his teeth. Someone shouted that there was no way to escape. Another officer asked what they were supposed to do because he didn't want to die. A massive horde of zombies stood directly before them. Juan wondered why his hand refused to obey him. A zombie lunged at him with its jaws wide open. Suddenly, an axe came flying in, and Juan asked what had just happened. Another officer pointed to the side and said it looked like someone was over there. The protagonist was cutting his way through the zombies out on the road. The system repeatedly announced that he had killed a level 1 zombie and earned 1 point. His face was drenched in blood, yet he wore a wide grin. He exclaimed that he had already collected 1,000 points and that this place was perfect. Juan asked whether he was even human. The young man wanted to know how he had managed to get through so many zombies. The female officer replied that he had not simply passed through them. He had fought his way across. Waving his hand, he told them to stop standing there in shock and escape quickly before more zombies arrived. The protagonist then approached Officer Juan. Juan smiled and introduced himself as Wanda, saying he was genuinely astonished by the protagonist's abilities. Gu asked why he was not running away. Juan replied that he wanted to ask him for a favor. Turning around, he looked toward the body of the little girl. He walked over, sat beside her on the ground, and explained that his daughter had been killed by a mutated rat. He hoped the protagonist would help him avenge her. The protagonist pointed out that there were only 2 of them and that they could never defeat so many mutated rats. Juan said he understood, but he had a plan. He explained that at first, only mutated rats had surrounded the police station. There had been no zombies. He had deliberately lured the zombies there, hoping the 2 sides would begin fighting each other. Frowning, Juan admitted that the plan had failed. Not only had the mutated rats survived, but they had become far stronger, leaving him in despair. However, the protagonist's arrival had given him a new idea. Looking at him, Juan revealed that he possessed a powerful explosive. Once detonated, it could kill most of the mutated rats. He said he would lure all the rats to one location, set off the bomb, and die alongside them. The protagonist would only need to deal with whatever survived. Bino exclaimed that he was insane. A thin crescent moon shone above the darkened city. Mutated rats wandered across the blood-stained roads. Juan asked whether the protagonist agreed with his plan. He explained that he would detonate the explosives as quickly as possible, and if the protagonist never saw the explosion, he shouldn't wait any longer. He should simply leave. The protagonist asked why he was so determined to set off the explosives himself. Juan answered that the creature responsible for killing his daughter was the leader of the rats. He explained that every mutated rat outside was nothing more than one of its subordinates. The mutated rat raised its snout. Juan asked the protagonist to clear a path for him. Carrying the explosives in his hands, he charged straight into the swarm of rats. One of the creatures lunged at him with its jaws wide open. Buzz leaped forward and sliced the rat's head clean off. Frowning, he told Juan to keep running because he would handle the rest. Juan thanked him. After landing, the protagonist casually replied that it was no trouble. Watching him run, the protagonist realized Juan was willing to sacrifice his own life to avenge his daughter. Crazy or not, that kind of resolve deserved respect. Juan rushed deeper into the building, stumbled to the ground, gritting his teeth. He muttered that he had finally made it inside and that this time he would definitely kill it. Pulling himself back to his feet, he continued farther into the building. Waiting ahead of him was a massive rat king, a rank 2 mutated beast. Juan's face turned pale as memories of his daughter flooded back. She had once asked him when he would finish work. Juan had told her to wait because they would be going home soon, asking her to play inside the police station until then. Smiling, she agreed and told him she loved him. Calling her by name, Aya, Juan had replied that he loved her too. Moments later, she said she was scared and asked why those people were banging on the door. Then the monster seized her in its jaws. Reaching out toward him, she tearfully whispered that she was afraid. Stretching out his hand toward her, Juan screamed, "No!" Standing atop the building, the protagonist noticed that no explosion had gone off yet. He wondered if the plan had failed. The rats suddenly rushed toward the building, their shrill screeches piercing the air. Then a massive explosion erupted from inside the structure. Raising a hand to shield himself from the blast wave, Benyu realized Juan had finally succeeded. Gritting his teeth, he decided it was now his turn. He jumped down to the ground. The protagonist observed that the explosion had been unbelievably powerful. Nearly all the zombies and mutated rats had been wiped out, and many of them had dropped attribute crystals. Holding a purple crystal in his hand, he identified it as a level 1 beast attribute crystal. Picking up another crystal, he exclaimed that it carried the fire beast attribute. He crushed both crystals in his hand, and the energy contained within them surged into his body. His spiritual companion absorbed the energy. Gula silently thanked Juan for giving him this opportunity and vowed that he would never forget his sacrifice. He turned his gaze toward the darkness. As he ran in that direction, he sensed that someone else was moving nearby and knew he had to investigate. His spiritual companion lion vanished back into his body. The protagonist came to a stop before the burning ruins. The head of a gigantic rat emerged from beneath the collapsed stone debris. His eyes widened in shock. As the Rat King appeared directly before him, one crawled out from beneath the rubble and begged him to kill the creature. The protagonist stared at him in disbelief, asking how he had managed to survive. One explained that the mutated rats had absorbed most of the explosion, allowing him to survive. He begged Gu to kill the creature, revealing that it was the one responsible for his daughter's death. Smiling, Gul told him not to worry, since the Rat King was already badly wounded. The Rat King opened its jaws wide, and a powerful strike sent the protagonist flying to the side, throwing up a cloud of dust. A notification appeared: first skill, Soul Strike. Gu's eyes glowed blue as he declared that the rat did not have much time left. A white laser shot from his eyes. The Rat King collapsed onto the ground, smoke rising from its body. As the protagonist approached, he picked up an axe. He raised the weapon high. The Rat King's eyes flashed red. The system notified him that he had killed a level 2 mutated rat and earned 153 points. Gu stood before the Rat King's corpse. Wan rose to his feet and stared at the monster's severed head. He told his daughter that the creature was finally dead. The protagonist looked at him with a smile before dropping to his knees. Wan said he did not even know how to thank him. Still smiling, Gu told him there was no need for gratitude and tossed 3 crystals toward him. Wan caught them. The protagonist said Wan had earned them. He had already taken half for himself, so they were even. Since Wan had survived, those crystals might prove useful to him. Wan looked at him in astonishment. As Venu prepared to leave, he told Wan to be more careful from now on. Wan asked where he was headed. Turning back, the protagonist replied that he was going to John Bean Park. The amusement park was engulfed in flames and overrun with zombies. A massive horde of undead wandered through the park. Thick columns of smoke rose high into the sky. The protagonist opened his status window and examined his attributes. He noted that he had reached the peak of level 1 and had already accumulated more than 1,000 points. With his current stats, he shouldn't have any trouble entering the treasure land. Looking ahead, Venu said his memory had been correct. In his previous life, the portal to the treasure land had opened in the middle of the night. A deafening roar suddenly made him turn around. A gigantic beast resembling a lion let out a terrifying roar. The protagonist immediately recognized it as a mutated lion. Zombies with glowing red eyes began converging on the monster. The lion's eyes widened as it unleashed a massive stream of flames from its mouth. Gritting his teeth, Venu muttered that this had to be a joke and wondered why the creature was here. He remembered that in his previous life, when this lion appeared, it had destroyed almost the entire city. Standing atop the ruins, the mutated lion continued spewing torrents of fire. A young boy stretched out his hand and cried for help. The protagonist recalled that the lion had slaughtered everyone in its path, wiping out both zombies and hunters before reducing the city to ruins. The monster leaped forward, pursuing him. Venu reflected that not even ordinary level 3 beasts, let alone level 5 ones, had been able to stand against it. Yet in his previous life, he had never heard of it appearing here. He wondered if perhaps no one had survived back then, leaving no one alive to report its existence. The mutated lion opened its jaws, revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs as crimson flames swirled around it with every breath. The protagonist muttered that he had almost overlooked it. If he wanted to survive in this world, he would have to become far stronger. Vaulting over a fence, he resolved that before the lion found him, he needed to kill as many zombies as possible and earn more points. Meanwhile, several people moved cautiously through the ruins. The young man in the green jacket urged the others to hurry, explaining that the lion had already wiped out most of the zombies, so they needed to move quickly and claim the treasure first. The boy with bangs covering his left eye asked whether it was really safe and what would happen if the lion spotted them. The boy whose bangs covered his right eye agreed, saying it was far too dangerous. The young man in the green jacket asked if they had forgotten the oldest rule: the greater the risk, the greater the reward. Turning back to them, he reminded them that he had already told them a treasure was hidden in this place and insisted they couldn't let anyone else discover it. The boy with the bangs asked where all that confidence came from. The young man in the green jacket held up a crescent-shaped pendant and explained that, before meeting them, he had been pulled into a silver vortex. Inside, he had found a treasure chest, and when he opened it, he discovered a map hidden within the pendant. That was why he knew for certain a treasure awaited them there. The others stared in amazement as the pendant began floating into the air. One of them asked what was happening and why it was rising on its own. Portal opened before them. Laughing, the young man in the green jacket declared that they had found the treasure. Elsewhere, the protagonist stood among the corpses of fallen zombies, frowning. His eyes widened as he turned and spotted a portal hovering above the buildings. He wondered if it was the entrance to the treasure land. At last, all his efforts had paid off. The portal had finally appeared. Bounding across the rooftops in enormous leaps, Venu told himself that as long as he avoided attracting the lion's attention and slipped into the portal unnoticed, everything would be fine. 10 minutes later, he landed on the roof of another building and found himself facing a dark portal. Venu exclaimed that he had made it in time. Standing before the portal, he concluded that it appeared to be a large-scale rank 1 treasure land. Curious about what awaited inside, he decided he had to investigate. Pushing off the ground, he leaped forward and disappeared into the portal. A brilliant flash burst from the portal suspended in the sky. The monster's eye gleamed with a fierce light, surrounded by surging energy as it let out a thunderous roar. Venu emerged from the portal and landed on the ground. He rose to his feet as the system welcomed him to the large-scale rank 1 treasure land. Smirking confidently, the protagonist remarked that it truly was a large-scale rank 1 treasure land. This time, he might finally obtain something extraordinary. Looking around, he noticed several people standing among the stone statues. His eyes widened as someone asked in surprise who he was. One of the boys turned to his leader and asked how anyone else could have arrived there. Weren't they the ones who had opened the portal? The young man in the green jacket admitted that he had no idea. A blonde-haired boy raised his twin pistols and asked if he should kill the newcomer. The young man with the green jacket told him not to act recklessly. They first needed to determine how strong the newcomer was. If he turned out to be weak, they could kill him after taking everything he possessed. Smiling, he reassured the protagonist not to be nervous, explaining that they had only just arrived themselves. He added that this place operated under its own rules. Fighting between participants was forbidden, so there was no need to worry about personal safety. Venu planted his foot firmly on the ground. A scornful smile spread across his face as he wondered if they were actually mocking him. They were concerned about his safety? He couldn't help but grin. If this place didn't have rules, he would have killed every one of them long ago. There was no reason to fear them. Even if they found valuable treasures here, he had no intention of letting them leave with them. A dialogue window appeared from the mouth of the stone statue. It read, "Attacking other participants is strictly prohibited. Anyone who violates this rule will be immediately teleported out of the treasure land. Survivors may enter the trial arena through the stone pillar, where the challenges will increase in difficulty with each stage. Once a challenge begins, participants may only leave after completing the current stage. Attempt only what matches your abilities. Whoever clears the highest level of the trial will claim the treasure land's main reward. Afterward, the portal to the treasure land will close." The protagonist smiled, remarking that the rules made things far more interesting. One of the boys struck the stone statue with his hand and declared that since they had arrived first, he would be the one to begin the trial. A beam of light enveloped him, and he was instantly teleported away. The system announced that the trial had begun. A zombie materialized in the arena before him. A notification appeared, Stage 1, Common Zombie. Bino recalled that, according to what he had learned in his previous life, every treasure land belonged to a specific category. Peaceful-type treasure lands were the easiest, offering the safest but most ordinary rewards. Infernal-type treasure lands were of medium difficulty, with a small chance of death, while demonic-type treasure lands were the most dangerous of all. The young man lunged at the zombie, shouting for it to die. He struck it, his hands wrapped in energy. Standing over the zombie's fading corpse, he remarked that this appeared to be a peaceful-type treasure land, meaning the real challenge would only begin near the end of the trial. He considered himself extremely fortunate to have entered the easiest category. Light gathered together and took shape. The system announced, Stage 1 cleared successfully. Reward, F-grade steel sword. Would you like to continue? Taking hold of the sword, the young man answered, yes. 3 zombies immediately appeared around him and charged straight at him. Swinging his sword, he cut down every zombie surrounding him. The system announced that he had cleared the second stage. Smiling, the young man commented that earning rewards was surprisingly easy. Another notification appeared, Reward, F-grade cloth armor. Would you like to continue? The young man selected yes. The young man in the green jacket remarked that coming here had definitely been worthwhile. The boy with the bangs encouraged him to keep going. Watching him, the protagonist asked if he had really decided to continue. He reminded him that the farther he advanced, the more difficult the trials would become. A massive monster appeared behind the young man. He ducked as 2 blades slammed into the ground directly in front of him. Staring at the creature, he exclaimed that it was a level 4 zombie. An explosion erupted across the arena. The zombie charged, and the young man realized it was several times stronger than he was. Grabbing him by the throat, the zombie hurled him into the ground. Cracks spread across the floor beneath them. Baring his teeth, the young man admitted that he couldn't handle the monster. His only option was to surrender, and he declared that he was giving up. The creature broke apart into pixels and vanished. The system announced that the trial had failed. The young man remarked that it had been easy. Closing his eyes, the protagonist said he was stunned. The young man in the green jacket announced that he would go next. Laughing, he asked asked whether the others minded watching from the sidelines. As Bennu dissolved into pixels, he told them to do whatever they wanted because he didn't care. One of the boys remarked that this guy clearly loved acting all-powerful. The other agreed, saying that once they got out of there, he would show him who was really in charge. The young man in the green jacket told them not to say anything foolish. He believed the newcomer was fairly strong and suggested they first see what he could do. If he turned out to be weak, they could kill him afterward. Emerging through the portal, the protagonist swung his axe. A notification appeared. Stage 1 cleared successfully. Reward, F-grade steel sword. Would you like to continue? Taking the sword, Wood smiled as energy continued to surround him. He killed 3 zombies. Another notification appeared. Stage 2 cleared successfully. Reward, F-grade cloth armor. Would you like to continue? With a broad grin, the protagonist selected yes. A gigantic zombie materialized behind him and immediately lunged in to attack. Wood sidestepped the assault with ease. The boy with the bangs was convinced this was where he would finally lose. Raising his sword as blue energy wrapped around the blade, Wood focused on the level 4 zombie. With a single slash infused with blue energy, he struck the monster. Smiling, he remarked that this was nothing more than a warm-up. The system announced, Stage 3 cleared successfully. Reward, Novice Restoration Potion. The young man in the green jacket stared in disbelief, asking if he had really defeated it that easily. The boy with the bangs commented that he was far faster than Tao and that he had never met anyone so extraordinary. Another boy with bangs asked what was going on. The blonde-haired boy forced an awkward smile and asked whether they truly needed to kill the protagonist. Wearing an ominous smile as blue energy surrounded him, the protagonist told the system to begin the next stage. Several zombies rushed toward him from different directions. As he frowned and glanced to the side, one of the zombies landed a hit on him. The impact launched him into the air, but with a smile he thought that his attributes had already reached 20. A level 4 zombie no longer posed any threat to him. The system announced, Stage 4 cleared successfully. Reward, 2 first-rank crystals. Would you like to continue? He cleared 3 more stages, earning a medium restoration potion, an F-rank protective jade fragment, and a spatial teleportation scroll. The protagonist stood holding a sword shrouded in blue energy. A notification appeared. Stage 8 cleared successfully. Reward, F-rank spatial ring. Would you like to continue? Several items appeared before Venu. F-rank protective jade fragment, a consumable capable of blocking 100 attacks from level 1 creatures, 10 attacks from level 2 creatures, or 1 attack from a level 3 creature. Spatial teleportation scroll, a consumable that allows the user to teleport to any location within a limited range. F-rank spatial ring, a storage ring capable of holding items inside it. Smiling, the protagonist remarked that the rewards from the later stages were surprisingly valuable. The young man in the green jacket was speechless. He wondered whether this guy was a superhero or a god. Reaching out toward the rewards, Venu smiled and said that for a first-level profession, artifacts like these were incredibly useful. They were excellent rewards. Then, the system announced the beginning of the 9th trial. The protagonist looked surprised, realizing the system had not asked whether he wished to continue. A gigantic gate covered in glowing purple runes appeared before him. Venu frowned, wondering why it resembled a gateway to the demon world. The more he looked at it, the more convinced he became that it truly was a demon world gate. Compared to the one from his previous life, however, this version was much smaller. He couldn't understand why it had appeared here at this point. Suddenly, a voice spoke directly into his mind, asking how he recognized the demon world gate and where he had seen one before. The protagonist immediately turned around and demanded to know who was speaking. The voice told him not to bother searching. It explained that it was the guardian of this treasure land, making it impossible for him to see it. Frowning, Venu realized he had never heard of anything like this in his previous life. This place was becoming stranger and stranger, and he suspected that no one else present could hear the voice except him. The voice remarked that he was a fascinating person. Since he already recognized the demon world gate, he must also understand what awaited him in the final trial. After asking for permission to continue, it revealed that a powerful great demon was sealed behind the gate. Cold sweat ran down the protagonist's face. A deafening roar echoed through the arena as a massive claw burst through the gate. The voice informed him that, based on his performance so far, he had only a 10% chance of clearing the final stage. Venu asked if it was joking, only a 10% chance? The voice replied that if he couldn't defeat such a being, how did he expect to claim the treasure? It wished him luck and told him to kill or be killed. The protagonist's eyes widened in fear. Standing before him was a gigantic monster with enormous horns rising from its head. Staring at the creature's face, Venu asked what it was. The monster had 2 pairs of arms, and the voice explained that it was an ancient demon, the leader of all monsters and the ruler of the demon world. It offered him a hint. Although it was only a rank 1 ancient demon, none of its attributes exceeded 20 points. It also possessed a C-rank skill called destruction. Once activated, anything it touched during the next 10 seconds would be annihilated, bypassing every existing artifact and defensive ability. The demon raised its fists, and the voice remarked that it had already revealed more than enough. The protagonist frowned as the voice warned him to get ready. The monster was about to attack. Wrapped in crimson energy, the demon launched itself high into the air. Venu looked up, his eyes wide. The monster slammed into the ground with tremendous force. The protagonist dodged the impact and exclaimed in shock at an ability capable of ignoring every defense and artifact. The system announced, C-rank skill activated, destruction. Cold sweat covered Venu's face as he realized that a single touch would kill him. He knew he couldn't confront the ability directly. His only chance was to avoid it for 10 seconds and counterattack once it expired. The monster let out a deafening roar, throwing its head back. It swung one of its arms, but the protagonist gritted his teeth and leaped backward. Drawing on the combat experience from his previous life, he believed he had a strong chance of dodging every attack. The demon swung again, and Venu narrowly avoided the strike once more. As he landed, his eyes widened in surprise. Spinning around, he clenched his teeth. The monster charged straight at him with its jaws stretched wide open. The protagonist realized the battlefield was far too small, leaving him with almost no room to maneuver. Locking his eyes on his opponent, he activated Soul Realm and told himself he only had to endure 6 more seconds. The monster slammed the ground again, and Venu was stunned to realize that his ability had caused it no damage at all. Frowning, he swung his sword and wondered whether the creature truly had no soul inside its body. The voice laughed and admitted that it had forgotten to mention one detail. The ancient demon's consciousness had been deliberately disabled. It added that only 3 seconds remained before destruction expired, followed by a 30-second cooldown. Wishing him luck, the voice said it had placed high hopes on him. The protagonist frowned and tensely counted down from 3 to 0. The monster rapidly closed the distance and drove a fist wrapped in crimson energy into his stomach. Venu was hurled to the side, while the item in his pocket flashed green. His back crashed into the blue barrier, but after staggering, he managed to regain his balance. He realized he had narrowly survived the most dangerous moment, though the demon's attacks were still terrifyingly powerful. Gritting his teeth, he thought that even though the F-rank protective jade fragment had blocked the blow, it had still hurt. Looking at the green stone, the protagonist recalled that the F-rank protective jade fragment could withstand 10 attacks, meaning he still had 9 uses left. Frowning, he slipped the item back into his pocket. His axe gleamed in his hand as he realized the demon would be unable to use its special ability again for a while. He lowered his stance, his eyes glowing with blue energy. The monster opened its jaws as crimson energy enveloped its body. As Venu struck it with the axe, he decided that he could still fight back. The demon punched him in the face, and at that exact moment, the protective jade fragment in his pocket flashed once more. The axe left a shallow cut across the monster's body. The protagonist realized the ancient demon's defenses were incredibly strong, but if he kept striking the same spot, he could eventually break through. The monster punched him in the face again, and the protective jade fragment flashed inside his pocket once more. The protagonist stood before the demon with his sword gripped firmly in his hand. Narrowing his eyes, he stared ahead, focusing on the crack running across the monster's neck. Venu realized this was his chance. Swinging his sword with all his strength, he shouted for the demon to die. The monster opened its mouth, revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs as blood burst from the protagonist's mouth. Seizing the monster's arm, he brought his sword down in a decisive strike. The demon collapsed to the ground, bleeding heavily. Pressing a hand against his wound, Venu exclaimed that he had done it. A blue light enveloped him, and the mysterious voice told him to consider the healing a bonus reward. Looking down at his palm, the protagonist realized all of his injuries had completely disappeared. The voice admitted that it had never expected him to be strong enough to defeat the ancient demon. Venu turned around, and a tiny man no bigger than a baby appeared before him. The protagonist asked if he was the one who had been speaking to him the entire time. The guardian smiled and asked whether he was surprised, explaining that this was his domain and he could speak to anyone he wished. He told Venu not to worry because he genuinely liked him. Venu asked who he was. Closing his eyes, the guardian introduced himself as Alada. He explained that he was the guardian of Treasureland number 195, though by human standards, Venu could simply call him Big Brother. The protagonist asked whether that meant every Treasureland had its own guardian. A book appeared in Alada's hand. He replied that it was a good question, but the answer was no. Only large-scale and super large-scale Treasurelands were assigned guardians. Flipping through the pages of the book, Alada explained that, according to the guardian's rules, they were forbidden from initiating conversations with participants during the trials. If Venu hadn't been unusually curious, he would never even have learned that guardians existed. Venu asked who had written the guardian's rules. Alada replied that, of course, the rules had been created by his all-powerful powerful master. He told the protagonist to change the subject because his current authority level was not high enough to receive that information. The protagonist then asked what had happened to the world and where the treasure lands and all of those monsters had come from. Alada pointed out that those were clearly multiple questions. Venu answered that he only needed a single explanation. Closing his book, Alada said it was still too early for him to learn the truth, but the time would eventually come. The protagonist fell silent, awkwardly calling him a little kid. Alada told him to kneel down. Venu thought he had no choice but to obey if he wanted to receive his reward. He then asked whether he could finally claim the prize for clearing the final trial. Raising an eyebrow, Alada asked if he was getting impatient. He assured him that the reward would be given immediately. An object appeared in his hand, and he handed Venu a single sheet of paper. The protagonist stared at it and asked what was so special about an ordinary piece of paper. Raising one finger, Alada corrected him. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a rare treasure. Venu looked down at the sheet, and a notification appeared. Unidentified item acquired. Analysis in progress. The protagonist's eyes widened in surprise. The system announced that the analysis had been completed. The page read, Darkness Tome. Consumes souls and unleashes the power of darkness. This is the first page of the Book of Darkness, so its power is greatly weakened. Current ability. Once enough souls have been absorbed, the spells recorded within the Book of Darkness will become usable. The protagonist read the description in astonishment. He remarked that it truly was an incredible treasure, but regretted that he had obtained only a single page. He wondered where the remaining pages could be found. Alada smiled mischievously and said that because Venu had slain the ancient demon and proven his strength, he had decided to add him to the human sequence. His assigned number was 2. Venu asked whether that meant there was already someone else before him. Alada answered that there was. Kneeling before him, the leader asked what the human sequence was and what benefits it provided. Alada replied that it was quite simple. The human sequence was a ranking of individuals with the greatest potential, and those included on the list received assistance and support from the guardians. The protagonist rose to his feet, and the sheet of paper transformed into golden energy. The golden light spiraled around his hand before forming a ring on his finger. Venu smiled and said he liked it. Alada explained that from then on, whenever he entered a treasure land, he would receive a small bonus. A blue circle appeared beneath the protagonist's feet. A notification appeared. You have successfully completed the final stage. Teleportation has begun. The protagonist dissolved into pixels. The system announced that the teleportation had been successful, and he reappeared before the group with a smile. Venu thought that the rewards he had received were extremely useful. Although he had already used the F-rank protective jade fragment, he still possessed the spatial teleportation scroll and the spatial ring. Someone called out to him, and he turned around. The boys were staring at him with awkward smiles. The protagonist asked what they wanted. The young man in the green jacket admitted that Venu was incredibly strong and said he had never expected him to clear every stage. He then asked whether Venu wanted some companions. Venu thought about how hostile they had been at first, only to suddenly start acting friendly. Did they really think he was too blind to understand what they wanted? The young man offered for them to become his servants and promised they would obey every command he gave. Without even looking at them, the protagonist refused, saying they were far too weak and would only get in his way. As he turned away, he thought that they posed no real threat, but he would deal with them later. The boy with the bangs asked whether Venu was looking down on them and if he truly thought he was that impressive. He insisted that Venu had simply gotten lucky this time. Another boy with bangs covered his mouth with one hand and laughed awkwardly, telling Venu not to listen because his companion was only saying something foolish. The young man in the green jacket said that since Venu had no need for them, they would leave first. The protagonist agreed. The portal towered above the surrounding buildings. The snout of a mutated dog emerged from beneath a nearby bush, for people were thrown out of the portal and landed face first on the asphalt. As the boy with the bangs got back to his feet, he complained to the leader that they had lost everything because the protagonist had claimed all the rewards. He asked why they hadn't confronted him, since they could have killed him the moment he stepped out of the portal. The others suddenly stared past him in horror and shouted for him to run because something was right behind him. The beast opened its jaws behind his back. The boy spun around in panic. The mutated beast pounced on him, knocking him violently to the ground. The boy with the bangs let out a terrified scream. Another figure emerged from the portal, landing on the asphalt. The protagonist appeared behind everyone else. The beast hurled the boy aside, and another young man shouted at it to leave his brother alone. Wrapped in dark energy, the monster opened its jaws. Frowning, Venu wondered what was going on and why this dog was here. The mutated beast lunged forward once again. Gritting his teeth, the boy with the bangs drew his sword and cursed, vowing to kill the monster. Saliva dripped from the beast's mouth. Dark energy burst from its body, sending the boys flying in every direction. The protagonist protagonist muttered that this dog was unbelievably persistent. He couldn't believe it had followed him all the way here. If that was the case, then they would fight until one of them died. The beast sprang forward to attack. Venu gritted his teeth. Blood splattered through the air. The protagonist swung his sword, its blade wrapped in blue energy. Crimson energy engulfed the beast as it activated Berserker Fury. Clenching his jaw, Venu realized the dog had become even more ferocious. The more damage it took, the stronger it grew. Its ability clearly had some kind of enhancement effect. Surrounded by violet energy, he decided to find out which of them could outlast the other. He drove his sword deep into the monster's body. The beast refused to back away, and the protagonist slammed his sword into a nearby utility pole with tremendous force. The mutated beast crashed to the ground with a deafening impact. Venu was astonished that even after taking a soul strike, the creature was still capable of fighting. Its resilience was unbelievable. The monster slowly climbed back to its feet and stared at him. Then, without warning, it turned around and began walking away. The protagonist blinked in surprise, wondering what was happening. Was it actually retreating? He watched the beast disappear into the distance and wondered if that was really the end of it. Perhaps Soul Strike had left some lasting effect on the creature. In the end, he straightened up and decided to let it go for now. Turning away, he declared that if it ever tried to kill him again, he would make sure to finish it first. As he broke into a run, he reminded himself that his highest priority now was becoming stronger and reaching the exchange pillar to level up. Suddenly, the sound of a loud explosion echoed through the air. Venu froze in place, his eyes widening. The protagonist asked what that sound had been. He quickly turned around. The mutated dog was sprinting toward him with its tongue hanging out. Venu immediately sensed that something was wrong because the creature looked genuinely frightened as it ran. The protagonist clenched his teeth, his eyes widening. A mutated lion engulfed in flames was chasing the dog. It fired streams of fire from its eyes, and the blast struck the ground with tremendous force, sending the dog flying through the air. The streams of flame then swept toward the protagonist, washing over his face. Venu realized that the dog had led the lion straight to him. Breaking into a nervous sweat, he wondered what he was supposed to do now. Looking toward the glowing blue pillar, he realized it was his only hope. The mutated lion glanced from the fleeing dog to Venu. The protagonist reached forward, knowing he had to get to the exchange pillar and advance to the next level as quickly as possible if he wanted to survive. He couldn't afford even a second of hesitation. The lion rapidly closed in with its jaws wide open. It swung its enormous flaming paw, but the protagonist vanished instantly. Blue particles swirled around the pillar. The lion let out a deafening roar as a surge of crimson energy erupted around it. Quickly turned around and, standing directly in front of it was the mutated dog, trembling with fear. Breathing heavily, the protagonist sighed in relief, realizing he had made it just in time. He admitted that if he had hesitated even a little longer, he would already have become food for those beasts. Frowning, he reflected that everything had gone according to plan thanks to the knowledge he retained from his previous life. Raising his fist, Wu declared that he could remain safely inside the exchange pillar until the danger had passed. But then he wondered what he should do next. If he stepped outside, the lion would probably be waiting at the pillar's exit to devour him immediately. Suddenly, he noticed something and turned around. A gigantic monster shrouded in crimson energy towered before him. The system announced that the level-up trial had begun. The protagonist's eyes and mouth flew open as he instinctively assumed a fighting stance. He drew two swords and fixed his gaze on the long-fanged monster. He recognized it as a tusk rabbit. A notification appeared. Since the challenger is human, the time limit for this trial is 5 minutes. If you fail to complete the challenge within that time, you will be unable to level up for the next 10 days and will also lose your current status. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist cursed the strict time limit. The monster launched itself high into the air. The system displayed time remaining 5 o'clock. The beast swung its massive paw. Venu realized he should have expected the boss fight to be this difficult. Swinging his sword, he reminded himself that no matter what, he had to end the battle as quickly as possible. Losing was not an option. He exchanged blows with the monster, realizing that although the tusk rabbit looked like an ordinary beast, it possessed two abilities, meaning he would have to stay on guard.